Hello, everybody. This is Wade Nomura. Reporting back to you as the Council on Legislation delegate for District 5240. I want to give you a little bit of information on this, but first of all, give you a little bit of background on what the Council on Legislation actually is. The group meets every 3 years as mandated. This year, there were 538 districts that actually are in Rotary. Of that, 534 actual delegates did show up, and we're active in that one. The changes that were made from 2016 to 2019 now, one of them included the Council on Legislation, which meets now in the 3-year term. There is also a Council on Resolutions that used to meet equal. We used to do both, but as of last year, we split it up. So the resolutions now are being done each year, so it reduced the load. We have 2 less days than the Council on Legislation, saving a substantial amount of money for the council itself and through Rotary. The other points that I wanted to bring out, we had a total of 47 enactments of the 117 that were actually approved, and I'm going to go over each of those with you. It's going to be a very abbreviated presentation of those. However, if you want more information, I will show you how to gather up all the information, including the official documents that will be handed out by Rotary International. There are a number of other things, too, that I want to go over real quickly with you. That is, some of you are probably wondering about the process and how it works. I've got some pictures here I'm going to show you. But in the meantime, there's questions that arise. Sometimes, as we know, in Rotary, quote, there is no politics in Rotary. However, at the Council on Legislation, groups are allowed to lobby and discuss and decide and figure out if, in fact, they want to gain support or lose support based on interaction with other delegates that are there. Actually, even beyond the delegates, there are non-delegates, there are non-voting members that could also influence some of the enactments that are being proposed. A lot of the items also are cultural, and when I say that, there's areas around the world where some of the enactments, you wonder where it came from based on the United States and our culture here. And then you'll find, for example, in India, where there is a strong push towards moving up the, quote, Rotary ladder into different leadership roles, such as governor, directors, things like that, that they do go, I would say, above and beyond being politically correct, that of what we would do here in the United States. And so some of the items that were presented forward were to help limit those efforts. We had a total of 18 categories that were broken down by the enactments that were covered. And I'm going to jump into those shortly. First picture is the actual report you'll see will be given to you, will be provided on a link on our district website. But these are actually the reports of the enactments that were actually passed. As you can see, the date was April 14th to the 18th of this year. It was held in Chicago, Illinois. And again, we all meet, all 534 of us actually met on site to go over each and every one of these. The languages were 9 different languages. They're piped in. We all had headsets that you would find. This is what the actual room looked like. It's huge. Each of us were seated in a specific seating order. It was interesting because it was usually in alphabetical order. Both days, one was first name, one was last name, or by, I think it was your email address. The presiding group that you see in the front are actually designated members of the Council on Legislation. They were the ones that were in charge of running through the process and making sure that everything was held. This is the parliamentary group itself. Next picture we have actually shows what I'm given. I have my program right there, as you can see, a seating assignment, very specific to what I could do. You have the headset, that's your translator right there sitting next to you with the languages. You could change the languages up and down. Right now it's set at 00, that's the English version of it. And the item that you see on the right-hand side is actually your voting machine. Now, you see all the lettering and everything like that. The only 2 buttons, literally, that we used on that home machine for the 5 days that we were there were the 1 for yes and the 2 for no. That was it. But they gave us that. It gives us an instant tally. We were tested this on a daily basis to make sure that each of these things were working and functioning. We had monitors on site that would actually change those out if, in fact, one of the votes didn't occur, or if your screen went blank. because we did have some time where batteries actually just did wear out. Next picture we have shows the voting process. And when I say that, there's actually 4 cards there. You don't see the yellow one because the yellow one is overlapping with the one that we have with the blue stripes on it. The red is against, voting for a no. The green is a vote for yes, affirmative vote. The yellow comes up as a question or for any procedural process. And then the one with the blue stripes on it is used to close debate. And those things are used actually pretty frequently. This year, as opposed to last year, on the average, we only probably had about between 4 and 6 people talking on either side. So it was pretty well controlled. Sitting alongside of us, we had the international presidents, past presidents, board of directors, board of trustees. Literally, I took this picture sitting right next to them from my seat. And they actually do sometimes participate. They're allowed to speak within. They're non-voting members. However, they could also present on items and voice their support or vote against any of the proposed enactments. They serve, again, as non-voting members, but they do have the privilege of speaking for or against an item. Here we go. This was actually the second one. The first one that we had 17 items on that one. They all were voted down. And those were the items on the changes, the avenues of service, the objects of Rotary, and core values. Of the 17, 0 of those things passed. There were no changes, which is actually pretty interesting because some of them were very basic. Other of them wanted to have some pretty radical changes. Again, this council went to 0. They didn't want any changes on the core values of Rotary. The club administration was the next one that we had, starting with item number 18, 19-18, 19 being the year, 18 being the enactment number. This was actually presented by a group from India and was adopted by a vote of 305 to 204. And that request of this one specifically asked that clubs be required to be well balanced and making sure that the membership is diverse. And that actually had to do with some of the areas where they took out some wordage to make that an actual diverse club itself. So that was a pretty interesting point. Number 22 was presented by France. That was adopted by a number of 279 to 225. And that is the term of a president. And the term of a president, as voted on by and approved by the Council on Legislation, is that no president can serve more than 2 years consecutive. And the reason for that, they wanted to make sure that there was a change. Some of the clubs, again, will have a president that will continue through pretty much as long as they want to go through. So this limited them to a maximum of an additional year. They tried to hold it from 2 years to 18 months. 18 months, they will then be searching and looking for the next candidate. Item number 24, that was presented by Nigeria, and that was adopted by a vote of 408 to 102. The first time it was presented, it was deferred because there wasn't enough information given out. So then it was brought back on the third day for a vote on that one. And that was a requirement that there be a presentation of the budget and annual report to the club at a club meeting no later than December 31st of that year, as provided by the bylaws. Evidently in Nigeria, there's been some issues with getting reports. Some of the reports have been delinquent as much as 4 and 5 years. Number 26 is from Australia. That was adopted by a vote of 398 to 96. And the reason for that one was the change of that one went from a 10-day period. In other words, they wanted to have clubs given 10 days originally, then went to a 21-day period. So that was item number 26. The notice of name change used to be 10 days. However, it was moved to 21 days because well, not many of the clubs, there are now clubs that actually meet twice monthly. And with a 10-day period, they would not have time to act upon a name change based on a 10-day versus a 14-day week. So that's why it was extended to 21 days. Item number 28. 28 was a revision regarding locality of clubs. And what this one was, it was just a cleanup matter of now the E-clubs no longer have an E-club designation. They wanted to make sure that the locality of the club would include and exclude the worldwide clubs. So those clubs that used to be E-clubs now will no longer have to have that specific designation or requirement of having that. And so they actually just cleaned it up again. It was an E-club designation that became a general rule as of 2016 at the Council on Legislation that year. Number 29, amend satellite club reporting procedures. What this one was a request or requirement now that any satellite club has to have a financial budget presentation and report or audit done inclusive with the club itself. So any satellite portion of a club is required now to include a budget and also an audit of their financials. Next one we have is meeting and attendance. And this area here had two of them that were passed on those. Item number 30 was presented by Japan. It was adopted by a vote of 336 to 174. The specifics to that actually were just administrative adjustments. It was a changeover of the wording from the 2016 Council on Legislation enactment of flexibility. So that's all it was. It now allows for and puts the verbiage in for specifically what flexibility is meant, and then the changes that occurred from the 2016 Council on Legislation. Item number 35 was presented by a district from the United States, was adopted by a vote of 286 to 217. And what this one did was it amended the attendance makeup requirements from being meeting specific to now including projects and engagement of club members. So those who are now inclusive, in other words, you do not have to attend a meeting, projects and events will be included as part of the makeup process should a club decide to use those. Next point we have is on membership. On membership, again, there are only two enactments that were passed. Item number 37 was, this is an interesting one. It was actually presented by the Rotary International Board of Directors and was adopted by a vote of 380 to 105. And the wording on that, originally, it used to be that the bylaws would prohibit public officials, public officers, to actually be considered as part of a Rotary in classification. So what this one now did was it says, quote, the public officials could now retain their classification even during the time they hold a specific office, whether it be president or any of the board members. So there's no limiting factors if you are a public official. Number 39 removes the classification process or classification requirement. So now, based on this one, the enhancement process requires that there not be a limit on classifications within any specific club. Clubs are allowed to grow in diversity, and along with that, with the hopes that they do, classification system would not be, I would say, abused. Again, it opens it up to where classifications will no longer have a maximum number allowable per club. President, this is the election process of presidents. Item number 40 was presented by the United States, District of the United States. It was adopted 492 to 17, so it was quite the landslide. In this one, the specifics had to do with if there was a vacancy. These vacancies will be selected by the board through an alternative process, and at that time, the president will be elected to serve based on having an alternate selection process. Item number 41 has to do with another substantial change. This was again brought forward by the board of directors and voted on and passed by a vote of 458 to 50. So this was quite the landslide. Interesting one on this, for those of you that had heard my presentations previous to this, once every 3 years before, a president would be selected based on the bylaws to the presidency. It has now been changed to include that a president can come from the same country, but no more than once every 2 years. So there has to be a 2 years, a 1 year by before a president could be selected from the same country. So it will be every other year now as a maximum, potentially, that a country could have a president serving Rotary International. This one has to do with our Rotary International directory elections. Item number 43. On that one, what it did was it was just an increase on it. Oh, I'm sorry, the board of directors brought this forward, and it was adopted by a vote of 467 to 37. Again, a substantial margin of victory on this one. However, what this one did is it extended the time of the actual process of selecting the board of directors. So the meeting must occur between September 15th and October 15th, and then there is going to be a window that's increased to October 30th for time for more flexibility for those people that want to serve. So it opens up the specific window of nominating process, an additional extra time to allow for those people that want to serve and have time hardships, now going from October 15th to October 30th. The next one is item number 45. This was brought forward by a district in the United States, was adopted by a vote of 338 to 150. And this one has specifically to do with the nomination and election of directors. And on that one, this one talks about how the process is going to be done for nominating the nominating committee for the directors. And the change of this one actually has to do with a parallel process where, similar to selecting a representative for the Council on Legislation, the selection committee for Rotary International directorship would also follow a parallel pattern. So there will be one in the same process. One will be once every 3 years. The other one will be, again, every 2 years. So that is, every 4 years based on an alternate zone. So the process procedures will be identical. That way there's no mix-up or changes occurring as you move forward with the nominating process. Governor elections, item number 49 was brought forward by India, was adopted by a vote of 419 to 93. This nomination of governors has to do more specifically with how the election process is going to be done. The number of members have to, at this point, had to have a minimum number per club in order for them to be represented in selecting a governor. The idea for this was to stabilize the number of votes per club, which minimized the impact of having a club of, say, 5 having the same value as far as a vote as a club that would have 300 or 400. So there was an adjustment made on this one. It's still being stabilized and finalized, but that would then be based on the number of voting delegates approved or allowed by each of the districts based on the head count of or membership of a specific club. Item number 52, again presented by India, was adopted by a vote of 442 to 69. Again, the same thing occurs. However, the change on this one would be the challenge period, which is now standardized to 15 days. So you have 15 days to challenge the selection of a governor nominee or nominee designate. The guidelines for this became more specific because in the past it was a little bit harder for the clubs based on communication issues with some of these countries that have less developed communication available, to now be able to reach out with the 15 days, giving them time to react to that one. Item number 53, again from India, was adopted by a vote of 399 to 119. And this one here basically outlines that there are no voice governors on the board to authorize appointment of a past governor. So this is all being done by creating a more balanced nominating committee and also process as far as bringing the people forward for as the applications come forward. So that one again was for India. The idea on this one then is to create a more balance and have less influence based on selection by past governors and a past governors panel. Item number 54, we're jumping on that one. This is elections. Miscellaneous to this one, but again, included in item number 54, presented by Nigeria, adopted by a vote of 271 to 234. Again, very close. This amendment was provision for clubs voting at the district level. So what happens at this level, on this enactment, was the fact that they wanted to make sure that the clubs that were voting were in good standings. And so based on that, clubs that were that were behind on dues, substantially behind on dues, or had any other issues that were making them, quote, non-conforming with the rest of the district, would not be allowed to vote for a governor. Part of it, again, this is based on some of the influences of that one. The idea would be is that in the past, some of the governors were actually, or nominees, those that were applying, were actually creating clubs. These clubs were sticking around for 1-2 years to just get a vote out of them, and then they would disappear. So again, this is one of those cultural issues. Again, it was a good ruling, and I think it's going to definitely help out in the long process. Item number 55 was from the General Council of RIBI, that's Rotary International British Isles, was adopted by 417 to 81. Has very little bearing on us because Rotary International British Isles actually is their own entity. Now they vote, they run a kind of a parallel system to Rotary International, British Isles being very specific for them. They have their own leadership in that one, so I'm passing over that one. It won't affect us in any way. Next item we have is District Administration. Item number 57 was brought forward by the Board of Directors and was voted on and approved by a vote of 424 to 92. And this was to extend the deadline to submit the annual district finances at the club level. And the reason for this, they're finding that it was a little bit too difficult, so the extension of time was to allow for more consistency. And one of the reasons that was voiced out is that there were very few clubs with the ability to or districts to actually bring this forward and have their financials done in a timely manner. This then allowed for more time of it. There are so many clubs or districts that were doing it in haste and missing a lot of it. So this is, again, part of the process bringing us closer from a fiscal year to a calendar year. And one of the other advantages that we had because we're trying to combine both fiscal and calendar year reporting. Item number 58 was brought forward by Japan. Was adopted by a vote of 420 to 65, and that is to amend the process of convening district legislative meetings. And the idea on this one had to do with trying to get together with the majority of the clubs, giving a better time to make sure that that everybody was able to be involved with that. The idea is too, with the extension of that the meeting would occur within a 10-week period. An 8-week period of the requested date and time, giving it, I'd say, a better process, a better way of getting more of the district groups and clubs involved and engaged. This is a general, Rotary International General. This item number 61, again, was brought forward by a district from Japan. It was adopted by a vote of 403 to 106. This had to do with amending the duties of the board. The idea of this one, again, has to do with now having regular reports done by the RI Board of Directors, the director itself, required now to actually put out reports that will be distributed to each of the districts, zones, and then down distributed to the clubs for more transparency of actions of the Board of Directors itself. Item number 62 came from a district in the United States, was adopted by a vote of 306 to 214. This one had to do with the General Secretary actually being renamed to, remaining General Secretary, but also being given the designation of Chief Executive Officer or CEO. And the reason for this is the responsibility of the General Secretary does actually mirror that of a Chief Executive Officer. However, internationally and outside of Rotary, that a General Secretary nomenclature is not easily identified. However, a Chief Executive Officer or COO for non-Rotary entities is something that is quickly identified, hence the name CEO, and the change that occurred on that one. Item number 63, brought forward by the District of the United States, was adopted by a vote of 419 to 93. It is no longer required or necessary to wait a minimum of 2 years before a district or club undergo merging of the boundaries and the changes that would occur during that time. Prior to this, it was 2 years that were given for the transitional period and process. The new ruling now states that if, in fact, they're ready to go, they could go at their own discretion, making it a little bit easier for these changes that occurred during the district boundary lines and multi-district boundary lines. The next item we have is item number 66. That is was brought forward by the Rotary International Board of Directors. It was adopted by a vote of 444 to 62. And the interesting one on this one, it was brought forward that the name of the Rotarian magazine, it be actually changed and included instead of the Rotarian to a Rotary magazine, using the name Rotary as opposed to Rotarian, because fewer people were able to identify what the Rotarian was. Rotarian in name became too inclusive within the organization. Rotary then would be more outward facing. Examples of those were given. For example, Rotary Down Under was named as one of those names that reflect Rotary specific as far as reference to the general public. So that change was made, again, by a landslide vote. Item number 70 came from France. It was adopted by a vote of 302 to 205. The measure here empowers the board and the districts, then to the clubs, to actually terminate a club that falls below the number 6. This is something that we've been fighting for a long time. However, there are roughly 300 clubs in the Rotary world that are fewer than 6 members currently. And based on that, the idea would be to give them fair notice and have them then able to adjust or change their process, procedures, and membership to fall or to move above the number 5 count that they have. However, if they do not do this, the board of directors, if asked by the district governor, can terminate a club that is less than 6. Item number 72, this is under Rotary International, having to do with specifically with membership. Item number 72 was actually brought back twice. This is the one that was presented forward, had to do with the membership of including Rotaractors from a program of Rotary into an actual membership entity of Rotary itself. The actual details of this were postponed, put on hold. The first time this was brought forward, it was brought forward and was defeated. This is an actual constitution change. Because it was a constitution change, it required a supermajority or 2/3 positive vote in order for it to move forward. The first time it went through, it did not reach that number. The time it did come through, the number was 327 to 186. That was 63.7 in favor of, when you needed a 66.7. So the second time it was brought forward was one of the last items during the council itself on the last day. And the president, Barry Rassin, who I will include his quote in this, actually made a plea to take a look at it again. It was brought forward by one of the members of the Council on Legislation and asked to be reevaluated, revoted on, relooked at, which it was approved on. And at that time, then, it passed as a vote of 381 to 134. It was substantial on the change itself. Again, Rotaract will become members of Rotary in a different type of membership model. So they will not have the voting rights. They will not be given, quote, Rotary identification numbers. That's something that's going to be changed. There has not been a structured dues system created for them yet. The outcome of this, however, is that they anticipate the total number of Rotarians with this new model will increase as much as 500,000. So we will be approaching be closer to 2 million membership count. Item number 74 has to do with committees. Specifically, again, this one had to do with a convention, the International Convention Committees. And the International Convention Committees, there was a request to change and modify the bylaws brought forward by the Board of Directors, adopted by a vote of 451 to 56. So again, it was a landslide vote. And the idea of this one is to actually create, I would say, more fairness within that one. The chair and the conventioneers would then be given X amount of time or terms itself. Currently, there's some people that have been serving for a substantial amount of time. This one here will allow them to serve a maximum of 3 years consecutive. And so that is a change that occurred in the bylaws. Number 75, very similar to that one there. Again, it has to do with the change of Rotaract and Interact. Instead of the Rotary Convention Committee, this is the Rotaract and Interact Rotary International Committee for them. And that one was also passed with a 3-year maximum term for service by an individual. 79, this is under the Rotary International Conventions also in 79. It was amended that by the Rotary Board and voted on by a vote of 485 to 23 to modernize the convention process. And so some of the things are being changed within the Rotary Constitution and bylaws that would then change the process and procedures of how an annual convention could be held. That's a review study, taking a look at that to see if, in fact, changes could be made to make the conventions, quote, more reality of modern conventions. And so that's just an open end. Structural changes will occur and then be brought back forward to us. Item number 80 came from a district of the United States, was adopted by a vote of 414 to 98. This amendment of the bylaws actually follows the manual procedures, and the idea for this one is to make certain that the conventioneers be given specific time as far as being able to address or take a look at bylaw suggestions at that time. And it may also include a vote by the general membership as far as some changes that could occur, and that would be around the Council on Legislation. In other words, this would be another way to proceed with that one. Item number 82, this is under the Rotary International Finances and Per Capita. There was an increase that was voted on and approved based on the model that was given to us, financial model that was presented to us. There was going to be a shortfall that was going to occur in the next 2 or 3 years. So the increase is $1 for 20 to 21, and then again following the next year, 20 to 20, 22 to 23, there will be another dollar increase. So this keeps us above the line as far as being able to keep current with dues and a balance with the finances of the organization itself. Number 93. 93 is the changing of the name, which is specifically just that, of General Surplus Fund to Rotary International Reserve. And again, the Surplus Fund changed, it became more specific. The Reserve Fund now becomes just that. It's no longer surplus. It becomes a reserve to be used in times of need. So that was a change in that one. Again, it's just more procedural than anything else. Number 94 had to do with adoption. This came from California and Nevada, a district from the joint group, and that was adopted by a vote of 434 to 68. Again, the same thing. Previously, it was held to be 85% of the highest annual expense over the past 3 years. That was a calculation of that one. That was then approved to be brought forward the same. What we are looking at is a ceiling price for that reserve-specific fund. So the establishing of a general surplus fund was then changed and amended simultaneous with number 93. It now becomes the Rotary International Reserve Fund, even though this enactment was brought forward for general surplus. So the name change will occur. Again, it's going to become 85% of the highest annual expense over a 3-year previous period. So that would be the maximum Rotary International Reserve Fund itself. Next item we have up is item number 96. This has to do with the council and pre-meeting procedures. Number 96 actually has to do, it's brought forward by the board of directors, accepted and adopted by a vote of 325 to 182. Are now allowed to propose urgent enactments Hello, just checking on it. We got sound now. Sorry about that, everybody. I guess I was talking a little bit too long here, so we'll jump back into this one here. We are now on item number 96. So this urgent enactment was based on the ability for the organization to be a little bit more flexible, a little quicker in acting. So the Council on Resolutions meets once a year. If an item comes up that is very urgent and actually fits within the Council on Legislation, since we are the same representatives on the resolutions and the Legislations Committee, it was presented forward and approved that we would then be able to move through urgent enactments through the resolution process at the same time, running those parallel, saving potentially as much as 2 years in advance. So that was a change of that one. Item number 97 was brought forward by the Board of Directors again, was adopted by a vote of 434 to 77. This is again to call an extraordinary meeting in case of there was something that was urgent. If there was 90% vote as far as a survey was done, as far as the bylaws change, things like that would occur, then it would move forward into the process. If it could not reach a 90%, it would go ahead and have to take its time. But anything that we felt reached 90% or greater as far as the support or non-support would then be able to be adjusted at that time. So changes would then occur in front of rather than in back of after a process. Item number 100 was brought forward by Japan, a district in Japan. It was adopted by a vote of 341 to 137. This enactment had to do with the wording specific on clubs and districts as far as proposing resolutions. The ability of this to be done is that we're looking at doing it potentially by mail for some of the areas. Since this could not be done, it was then brought forward that the General Secretary would have a means of actually voting things in by mail in a larger scale. Some of the areas felt that if there was I would say, miscommunications or a lack of electronic communications, that it would be necessary to put out an actual physical mailing. And that was why this was done. It was more based on urgency as a possible process as opposed to the current times, just to cover our bases. Item number 101, again, brought forward by the Board of Directors, was adopted 451 to 55. This enactment reduces the possible number of proposed resolutions by screening resolutions and eliminating those that already are in place by the Board of Directors based on their studies and oversight, or anything that is defective. In other words, it eliminates those things specific, giving us more time to take a look at those ones that are, I would say, qualified versus those that would already have the decision made based on being inconsistent or already in place. 102 from the Board of Directors, again, adopted by a vote of 450 to 65, using the Council on Resolution as a voting process. 20% of support, it would remove any item from the agenda. So if you could only gain 20% on a Council on Resolution for an enactment, then it would probably be terminated at that point in time rather than being brought forward. Item number 103 is basically the same thing. It's bringing this forward again, using it with an 80% on the other side of support. Then it would automatically move forward into the process. So 20% lacks, it would go away. 80% would move forward with it instantly. Item number 110. Basically, this is on councils and miscellaneous. 110 has to do with credentialing. The credentialing is actually already done in process. When we go through the process, we are sometimes checked, double checked, triple checked. We would have as many as 4 times we are actually checked for our credentials. Since the process is already in place, the credentials are already met with one single process. The General Secretary, Chief Executive Officer, would have the ability then to put something in place to make it just a one-stop shop, making it much easier for us to get through the process and saving time for administrative expenses in doing this double check. Number 112 came from England, was adopted by a vote of 258 to 252. This is probably the closest one, I believe, of all of them were done. This idea was to remove or limit the amount of members on the Council on Legislation, which was, I would say, a little bit on the tricky side. This one here had to do with specifically members only of the Council on Legislation and Council on Resolutions would be able to become part of the, I would say, the expense of the council. The other people that were voted out, and this is an interesting one, were members of the board of directors and trustees, which originally were part of the financial commitment of the council, are no longer allowed to be on there. So it's just very specific. You will have one member of the board, one member of the trustees, along with the president and president-elect. That's it. And the general secretary, of course. All past presidents no longer will be able to serve as an observer. If they decide to come, they will be specifically that, just as an observer. Number, see who I got. Number 113 was from Japan, adopted 343 to 151. It obligates the convener of the Rotary Institutes, Zone Institutes basically, to report legislation and resolution actions on the Council of Legislation required at each of the Rotary Zone Institutes. And so the updates of those now are required, pretty mandatory. Evidently there are some questions or issues in Japan because they seem to be the ones pushing it forward. This one here is kind of automatic in our area, but I guess some other parts of the world it isn't. 114, again, brought forward by Japan, adopted by a vote of 323 to 180. Clubs may submit opposition to Council on Legislation actions. Again, through the General Secretary. Once it's published, tabulated, opposition statements can be made. So Rotarians actually now have the process, and as you will see, and I will be sending this out, opposition notes, notifications are going to be available on the back page of our report. So if you're interested and want to see if there's something you just don't agree with, I would suggest go ahead and fill it out and send it in. Item number 115. These have to do with technical legislation. These are some of the ones about forward. These are the last of the three that we have. Number 115 from the Rotary International Board of Directors adopted 494 to 13. Consolidates the language of the bylaws and the Constitution, of the bylaws, now making it more consistent. In other words, currently the document is so big because it's been expanded out since day one of Rotary. Right now it's been added to. So we have now moved it forward, saying that it's time to modernize it, time to simplify it, and put everything back into place where we have a document that's not living as in growing, but living as in something that's more functional. So that was 115. 116 is the same thing, except for at the RI level. This one here is more specific to club constitutions. So we will also be using that same model once we have the international one done. We will then pass this information down to the clubs so the clubs can use a more simplified or more up-to-date version of a club constitution. Number 117, this is the one that was left very last. If some of you may have taken a look at our binders, this number did not show up originally as far as what we received on the council as the Council on Legislation. This was brought forward as an urgency. It took the longest 55 minutes worth of debate going back and forth. It was somewhat contentious at times. This was brought forward by the Board of Directors and adopted by a vote of 374 to 120. And this item had to do with Rotary International actually submitting and filing for a 501c3 status, making it a charitable organization. Currently, it is a 501c4 nonprofit organization. However, making it a charitable organization will assist, make a little bit of difference. They feel that there be more money available for the charitable foundation as opposed to the C4 nonprofit organization. There was some points brought forward outside that I cannot disclose to you, but it would had to do with the substantial amount of money and sponsorships being offered to a 501c3 organization, a charitable organization that could be used to offset some of the work that Rotary International has done. Again, it was a very contentious vote. It was very dividing. It was endorsed by Rotary Board of Directors and by the Rotary Foundation Board of Trustees, nearly unanimous as far as them being united in the front on wanting to see this come forward. So with that, that completes pretty much what I've got. I've got a picture here of Dwayne Benton, who is actually the last 2 years Council on Legislation Chair. He's a federal court judge. He runs the show. We got to be very good friends from the first time. I actually was able to do a TV interview with him. We'll be having a show coming out, interviewing him himself on the Council on Legislation, some of the changes. So you'll be able to see it on our TV show. That's www.wearerotary.tv. Hope to have that out here in probably the next month or so. So you'll be able to see behind the scenes on that one, some of the points that we have here. I will be able to get into a little bit more detail. Again, can't cover everything. But with that, Scott, do we have availability for questions? Apologize for that. We went through, you got to figure I went through 5 days worth of meetings right now in about 50 minutes. So hope I didn't bore you all. But there's some items there. Again, the information you'll be able to find soon on the district website. I'll be posting these up there, I hope, within the next 2 or 3 weeks. Okay, so if you have any questions, you can fire them away at me. I'm going to be signing off here because I don't have the means to actually read any of those. So email me those, and I'd be happy to answer any of those for you. If there's enough desire or need to actually go out there and be more specific on any of these, I'd be happy to be very specific on you. Ideally, be able to meet with a group of you, some of the groups areas. If you want to go over some of the points that we have, I think there's a lot of opportunity to work with the new changes that occurred in the Council on Legislation. So with that, thank you very much for your time. We will be signing off. So good luck on that. Again, Rotary is moving forward. We're trying to get more modern, more forward, more advanced. The changes that we are making, I believe, will benefit the organization substantially. Ideally, the plans are that we become more mobile, more diverse, and more flexible in how we react, thereby becoming more modernized as far as an organization. So with that, thank you very much. We will see you next time.